Before Billy Zane became the internet's favorite meme villain, he was terrorizing audiences in one of the 90s most underrated horror gems. But did you know the film originally had no demons at all? From a biblical salesman army to Cameron Diaz almost playing the final girl, to the shocking fact that this groundbreaking film featured horror's first black woman to save the world, Demon Night is packed with behind-the-scenes secrets that are stranger than any demon the collector could summon. Fact 1. The script predates Tales from the Crypt by 2 years. Most fans assume that Demon Night was created specifically for the Tales from the Crypt television series, but the truth is far more surprising. The original screenplay for what would eventually become Demon Night was actually written in 1987 by screenwriters Ethan Reif and Cyrus Voris, a full 2 years before the HBO Tales from the Crypt series even premiered in 1989. This means the story existed as a completely independent project long before anyone thought to connect it to the famous Crypt Keeper and his macabre anthology tales. The script's journey to the screen was anything but straightforward, bouncing between different directors and studios for nearly a decade before finding its final home. Initially, the project was intended to be horror director Tom Holland's follow-up film to his successful 1988 thriller Child's Play, which had made the killer doll Chucky a household name. Holland was so enthusiastic about the demon-filled script that he even hired a special effects team to create preliminary sketches and concept art for the supernatural creatures that would terrorize the main characters. However, Hollywood's unpredictable nature struck again when Holland suddenly abandoned the project to direct Fatal Beauty, a comedy starring Whoopi Goldberg that would go on to become a notorious box office bomb. After Holland's departure, the screenplay continued its long journey through Hollywood's development process, passing through the hands of Pumpkinhead writer Mark Carducci, who held onto it for several years without moving forward. The script eventually made its way to Pet Sematary director Mary Lambert before ultimately landing with producer Joel Silver's company, where executives finally recognized its potential as part of the Tales from the Crypt theatrical franchise. By the time filming began, the original 1987 screenplay had undergone numerous rewrites and adaptations, but its core story of good versus evil remained intact from those early days when it had nothing to do with the Crypt Keeper's world. Fact 2. There were 2 completely different scripts. When Universal Pictures greenlit Demon Night for production, the studio faced serious budget concerns that forced the filmmakers to make some truly bizarre creative decisions. Rather than simply cutting scenes or reducing special effects, the producers took the unusual step of creating 2 entirely different versions of the script to accommodate different budget scenarios. The version audiences eventually saw featured Billy Zane's collector as a supernatural demon commanding an army of grotesque, hellish creatures, but the alternate low-budget script told a completely different story that would have changed the entire tone of the movie. In the budget-friendly version, the collector wasn't a demon at all, but instead was reimagined as a charismatic Bible salesman traveling through the American Southwest. This version would have portrayed him leading what appeared to be a legitimate religious organization, complete with a team of fellow salesmen dressed in matching black business suits and dark sunglasses. The twist would have been revealed later in the film when audiences discovered that these seemingly ordinary door-to-door evangelists were actually demons in disguise, using their religious cover to hunt down the mystical key that could bring about the end of the world. This alternate approach would have relied heavily on psychological tension and paranoia, rather than expensive creature effects and elaborate makeup. The black-suited salesman would have functioned similarly to the iconic agents in The Matrix, creating an atmosphere of corporate menace that would have been far cheaper to produce than the elaborate demon designs that ultimately appeared in the finished film. The religious angle would have added an extra layer of dark irony, with the forces of evil literally disguising themselves as representatives of good. Fortunately for horror fans, Universal ultimately decided to allocate the necessary funds for the full demon version, allowing audiences to experience the spectacular practical effects and creature work that made Demon Night the cult classic it became. Fact 3. Cameron Diaz was the studio's first choice. Universal Pictures had their sights set on a completely different actress for the role of Geraldine, the tough ex-convict who would ultimately become the film's final girl and savior of humanity. The studio executives were pushing hard for Cameron Diaz, who in 1995 was still a relatively unknown actress, having only appeared in The Mask the previous year alongside Jim Carrey. At the time, Diaz represented the kind of blonde, conventionally attractive leading lady that studios typically preferred for horror films, fitting the established pattern of final girls that had dominated the genre for decades. However, director Ernest Dickerson had a completely different vision for the character and was determined to cast someone who would bring a different kind of authenticity and strength to the role. Dickerson had recently seen Jada Pinkett's powerful performance in the 1993 urban drama Menace: The Second Society, where she played a young woman navigating the dangerous streets of South Central Los Angeles. Her portrayal in that film convinced Dickerson that she possessed exactly the kind of fierce determination and street-smart toughness that Geraldine needed to be believable, as both a reformed criminal and someone capable of standing up to supernatural evil. The director had to campaign extensively with the studio to convince them to cast Pinkett instead of their preferred choice. Dickerson later explained that he deliberately wanted an African-American actress for the role, because he knew it would subvert audience expectations in a brilliant way. As he put it, most viewers would automatically assume that the black character would be killed off early in typical horror movie fashion, making Geraldine's survival and ultimate triumph all the more surprising and satisfying. Executive producer Joel Silver, who had someone else entirely in mind for the role, eventually agreed to Dickerson's choice, allowing Pinkett to make history as horror cinema's first black female character to save the world. Fact 4. It was horror's first black female world. Savor. Demon Knight made cinematic history in a way that many viewers didn't fully appreciate at the time, as it became the first horror film ever to feature a black woman as the final girl who literally saves the entire world from complete destruction. This groundbreaking achievement was particularly significant given the horror genre's long and troubling history of either killing off black characters early in the story or relegating them to supporting roles that never allowed them to be the ultimate hero who saves the day. Throughout the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s, horror movies had established a clear and predictable pattern where black characters, especially women, were typically among the first victims to meet gruesome deaths, often serving as little more than disposable characters designed to raise the body count before the real story focused on white protagonists. Even when black characters managed to survive longer in horror films, they rarely took on the central heroic role of defeating the main villain and protecting humanity from supernatural threats. Director Ernest Dickerson was acutely aware of this problematic representation and made a deliberate choice to subvert these expectations with Geraldine's character arc. Rather than following the typical horror movie structure where the black woman dies early, Dickerson crafted a story where Jada Pinkett's character not only survives until the very end, but actually becomes the chosen successor to William Sadler's character as the next Demon Knight, literally inheriting the responsibility for protecting the entire world from demonic forces. Dickerson later stated that he was proud to direct the first film where an African-American woman saves the world, emphasizing how revolutionary this was for the genre. The significance of this achievement extends beyond just representation, as Geraldine's victory over the Collector and her acceptance of the mystical key means she becomes responsible for preventing the biblical apocalypse itself, making her triumph one of the highest-stakes victories in horror cinema history. Fact 5. John Larroquette has a secret cameo. Eagle-eyed viewers who pay close attention to the opening sequence of Demon Knight will spot a familiar face hiding in plain sight as John Larroquette makes a completely uncredited cameo appearance that most fans miss entirely. The beloved Night Court star, who was famous for playing the sarcastic prosecutor Dan Fielding on the long-running sitcom, appears in the film's opening Crypt Keeper segment as a disfigured slasher movie actor who is struggling to deliver a convincing performance on what appears to be a horror movie set. The scene unfolds as a classic Tales from the Crypt fake-out, initially presenting what looks like a typical slasher sequence where a grotesque killer is about to murder a woman in a bathtub. However, the scene suddenly reveals itself to be a movie within the movie when the Crypt Keeper yells, "Cut!" and begins berating the masked actor for his terrible performance. This is where Larroquette appears, pulling off his monster makeup to reveal himself as a frustrated actor who insists that yes, he does call what he was doing acting, much to the Crypt Keeper's obvious disgust. The Crypt Keeper delivers a series of trademark puns while criticizing Larroquette's performance, telling him that he's no Gory Cooper and that he isn't even a Robert Redford, before threatening to send him back to bit parts if he doesn't improve his work. The joke becomes even funnier when the Crypt Keeper ominously adds that he won't say what kind of bits he's talking about, delivering the line with his characteristic ghoulish glee. Larroquette's willingness to appear in this self-deprecating role without any screen credit shows his good humor about participating in the horror genre, especially since his character is essentially being told he's a terrible actor by a wisecracking skeleton puppet. The cameo adds an extra layer of entertainment for viewers familiar with his television work, creating an unexpected crossover between mainstream comedy and horror. Fact 6. 6 puppeteers operated the Crypt Keeper. The beloved wisecracking skeleton who introduced and concluded Demon Knight required a surprisingly large team of skilled puppeteers working in perfect coordination to create his memorable performance. What appeared to be a single character telling jokes and delivering his trademark puns was actually the result of 6 different people simultaneously controlling various parts of the Crypt Keeper puppet, making him one of the most complex practical effects characters ever created for a horror production. The intricate operation was divided into specific responsibilities, with 4 of the 6 puppeteers dedicated exclusively to controlling the Crypt Keeper's facial expressions and head movements. This meant that his ability to raise his skeletal eyebrows, move his jaw in sync with John Casser's voice work, and create the subtle facial expressions that made his jokes so effective required 4 separate people working together like a perfectly choreographed team. The remaining 2 puppeteers handled his body movements, including his hand gestures and overall posture that helped sell his personality as a theatrical showman. This level of complexity was necessary because the Crypt Keeper's appeal came largely from his ability to seem genuinely alive and expressive, despite being an animated corpse. His facial expressions needed to match the timing and inflection of Casser's vocal performance perfectly, while also conveying the character's mischievous personality through subtle movements that viewers would unconsciously register as natural and believable. The puppet was designed by Kevin Yeager, who had previously created special effects for the Nightmare on Elm Street films and understood how to build animatronic characters that could handle the demands of complex performances. The coordination required between all 6 puppeteers was so precise that they had to rehearse extensively before filming to ensure that every gesture and expression would appear seamless on camera, creating the illusion that audiences were watching a single living character rather than an elaborate mechanical creation controlled by multiple operators working behind the scenes. Fact 7. Billy Zane improvised the mouth sponge gag. One of the most memorably bizarre moments in Demon Knight came about completely by accident when Billy Zane decided to spontaneously add his own twisted flourish to a scene that was already written and rehearsed. The moment occurs when the collector needs to provide his newly converted follower Roach with a way to wipe away the protective blood that Breaker has used to seal the boarding house against demonic forces, and the original script called for a much more straightforward solution to this supernatural problem. However, during filming, Zane came up with the inspired idea of having the collector open his mouth wide to reveal a clean sponge sitting inside, which Roach could then use to remove the sacred blood barrier. This grotesque yet darkly comic image was entirely Zane's creation, born from his understanding of the character's twisted sense of humor and his willingness to push the boundaries of how weird and unsettling the collector could be, while still maintaining his charismatic appeal. The improvised gag perfectly captured the essence of what made Zane's performance so memorable throughout the film, as he consistently found ways to make the collector both terrifying and oddly entertaining at the same time. The mouth sponge moment exemplified the character's supernatural abilities, while also showcasing his theatrical nature, as he presents this helpful tool with the same flourish that a magician might use when pulling a rabbit from a hat. Director Ernest Dickerson and the crew were so impressed with Zane's spontaneous addition that they immediately incorporated it into the final cut of the film, recognizing that it added exactly the kind of unexpected weirdness that would stick in viewers' minds long after the movie ended. The scene demonstrates how Zane's deep understanding of his character led him to discover creative opportunities that weren't in the original screenplay, contributing to the film's unique blend of horror and dark comedy. Fact 8. The town name prophesies the apocalypse. The filmmakers didn't choose the name Wormwood for their isolated New Mexico town by accident, as this seemingly simple location name carries deep biblical significance that directly connects to the apocalyptic themes running throughout the entire story. Wormwood appears in the Book of Revelation as the name of a star that falls from heaven during the third trumpet blast, serving as one of the key signs that the end times have officially begun according to Christian prophecy. The biblical passage describes how this star called Wormwood falls from the sky like a blazing torch and poisons a third of all rivers and springs of water, making them bitter and deadly to anyone who drinks from them. In the context of Revelation, this catastrophic event represents one of the divine judgments that will devastate the earth before the final battle between good and evil takes place, making it a perfect symbolic choice for a town where demons are literally trying to obtain the key that will bring about the end of the world. By setting their story in a place called Wormwood, the screenwriters were essentially announcing to viewers familiar with biblical prophecy that this location would serve as ground zero for apocalyptic events. The name functions as a kind of hidden warning that the supernatural battle taking place in this tiny desert community has cosmic implications far beyond what the characters initially understand. The choice becomes even more meaningful when considering that the collector's ultimate goal is to use the mystical key to unleash hell on Earth and bring about the complete destruction of humanity. The fact that his final confrontation with the forces of good takes place in a town named after one of Revelation's harbingers of doom creates a layer of biblical foreshadowing that many viewers might miss on their first viewing, but adds extra depth for those who recognize the religious reference. Fact 9. The Crypt Keeper's eyes came from Chucky. Special effects designer Kevin Yeager had a clever solution when it came time to create the perfect eyes for the Crypt Keeper puppet that would appear in Demon Knight's opening and closing segments. Rather than designing completely new eyeballs from scratch, Yeager decided to reuse a key component from one of his most famous previous creations, the killer doll Chucky from the 1988 horror film Child's Play. Yeager had originally designed and built the animatronic Chucky doll that terrorized audiences in that film, creating a character that needed to appear both innocent enough to fool people into thinking it was just a regular toy, and menacing enough to be genuinely frightening when it revealed its murderous nature. The eyes he crafted for Chucky were particularly important to this effect, as they needed to convey intelligence and malevolence while still looking like they could belong to a children's plaything. When Yeager began working on the Crypt Keeper for the Tales from the Crypt television series, and later for Demon Knight, he realized that those same Chucky eyes would work perfectly for the wisecracking skeleton host. The eyes that had once stared out from a seemingly innocent doll's face were repurposed to give the Crypt Keeper his distinctive look, creating an unexpected connection between two of horror's most recognizable characters. This recycling of components wasn't just a cost-saving measure, but also demonstrated Yeager's practical approach to special effects work, where talented artisans often found creative ways to repurpose successful elements from previous projects. The fact that the same eyes went from a murderous doll to a pun-loving skeleton shows how the same physical components could be transformed to serve completely different characters simply through different contexts and applications, proving that effective special effects design often comes down to understanding how to make the most of available resources. Fact 10. Jimmy Hoffa gets a hidden grave cameo. The filmmakers of Demon Knight included one of the most cleverly hidden Easter eggs in horror movie history during the film's closing credits sequence, referencing one of America's most famous unsolved mysteries in a way that most viewers completely miss. After the main story concludes with the Crypt Keeper's typical wrap-up commentary, the camera begins a dramatic descent through layers of Earth as it travels downward to reach the Crypt Keeper's underground lair, creating a visual journey from the surface world down into the depths where the skeletal host resides. During this brief but visually striking sequence, eagle-eyed viewers who pause at exactly the right moment can spot a skeletal hand clutching a set of keys, and attached to those keys is a small name tag that clearly reads Hoffa. This is a direct reference to Jimmy Hoffa, the powerful president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters who mysteriously disappeared on July 30, 1975, and whose fate remains one of the most enduring unsolved cases in American criminal history. Hoffa vanished without a trace after leaving his home in suburban Detroit to meet with mafia figures, and despite decades of investigations, searches, and countless theories about what happened to him, his body has never been found. The mystery of his disappearance has become part of American folklore, inspiring countless books, movies, and television shows, with numerous claims over the years about where his remains might be buried. By including this tiny visual reference, the filmmakers were making a darkly humorous suggestion about the ultimate fate of the missing Union leader, implying that his body lies somewhere in the supernatural underground realm that the Crypt Keeper calls home. The joke works on multiple levels, both as a reference to popular conspiracy theories about Hoffa being buried in various locations and as a way of suggesting that some mysteries are so deep they literally extend into the realm of the supernatural. Fact 11. The cat's gender is a continuity error. One of the most amusing oversights in Demon Knight involves a simple household pet that somehow managed to confuse the entire cast, crew, and post-production team throughout the filming process. Chloe the cat, who belongs to Geraldine and serves as her loyal companion during the supernatural siege, suffers from a case of mistaken identity that creates one of the film's most glaring continuity errors. Yet this mistake went completely unnoticed by everyone involved in making the movie. The confusion begins when different characters refer to Chloe using opposite pronouns throughout various scenes in the film, with no consistency whatsoever about whether the cat is male or female. Irene, the no-nonsense boarding house owner played by CCH Pounder, consistently refers to Chloe as him whenever she mentions the cat during conversations with other characters. However, Geraldine, who is actually Chloe's owner and presumably would know her own pet's gender better than anyone else, refers to the same cat as her in multiple scenes throughout the movie. This type of continuity error is particularly embarrassing for a film production because it involves such a basic detail that should have been easily caught and corrected during script revisions, filming, or post-production editing. The fact that the cat's owner and another main character use different pronouns for the same animal suggests that either the script itself was inconsistent or the actors were improvising their dialogue and nobody was paying attention to these details during filming. What makes this mistake even more notable is that it survived through multiple stages of the filmmaking process where it could have been caught and fixed, including script supervision during filming, dialogue editing during post-production, and final review before the movie was released to theaters. The error demonstrates how even experienced film crews can overlook seemingly obvious details when they're focused on more complex aspects of production like special effects, action sequences, and dramatic performances. Fact 12. Willem Dafoe almost played the villain. Before Billy Zane charmed audiences with his suave and darkly comedic portrayal of the Collector, the filmmakers seriously considered casting Willem Dafoe in the role, which would have created a completely different and potentially much more disturbing version of the film's primary antagonist. Dafoe, who was already establishing himself as one of Hollywood's most intense character actors through his work in films like Platoon and Wild at Heart, represented a radically different approach to the demonic villain than what audiences ultimately experienced. While Zane brought a theatrical charisma and almost seductive quality to the Collector, making him simultaneously terrifying and entertaining with his smooth delivery and mischievous charm, Dafoe's interpretation would likely have emphasized the character's more genuinely menacing and psychologically unsettling aspects. Known for his ability to portray characters who exist on the edge of sanity, Dafoe would have brought an unpredictable intensity to the role that could have pushed the Collector into much darker psychological territory. The casting choice between these two actors represented a fundamental decision about the tone and style that the filmmakers wanted to achieve with their supernatural villain. Zane's eventual performance struck a perfect balance between horror and dark comedy, allowing him to deliver the Collector's twisted dialogue with a sense of playful menace that made him quotable and memorable rather than simply frightening. His ability to switch between charming manipulation and explosive violence gave the character multiple dimensions that kept audiences engaged. Dafoe's version of the Collector would have likely been more genuinely unsettling and unpredictable, potentially creating a character who was less fun to watch, but more psychologically disturbing. His natural intensity and ability to convey barely controlled madness might have made the Collector feel more like a genuine threat and less like an entertaining villain, fundamentally changing the film's balance between scares and laughs. Fact 13. Post-credits scene exists only on some formats. Demon Knight features one of the most bizarrely inconsistent post-credits sequences in film history, as the Crypt Keeper's final announcement about an upcoming sequel was mysteriously included on some home video formats while being completely removed from others, creating confusion for fans who experienced different versions of the movie depending on how they watched it. After the main credits finish rolling, the original theatrical version included a brief scene where the Crypt Keeper addresses viewers who stayed until the very end, asking them why they're still sitting there before excitedly announcing the next tales from the Crypt theatrical release. In this post-credits segment, the skeletal host promotes a film called Dead Easy, which was the working title for what would eventually become the 1996 sequel Bordello of Blood. The Crypt Keeper delivers this announcement with his typical enthusiasm and terrible puns, essentially functioning as a trailer for the next installment in Universal's planned Tales from the Crypt film series. This sequence was clearly designed to build anticipation for future movies and keep audiences engaged with the franchise beyond just the single film they had just watched. However, when Demon Knight was released on different home video formats, distributors made the puzzling decision to include this post-credits scene on some versions while removing it entirely from others. Viewers who owned the VHS or DVD releases could see the Crypt Keeper's sequel announcement exactly as it appeared in theaters, but those who purchased the Laserdisc version or later Blu-ray editions found that the scene had been completely cut from their copies of the film. No official explanation was ever given for why this scene was selectively removed from certain formats, leading to speculation about licensing issues, studio politics, or simple oversight during the transfer process. The inconsistency meant that many fans remained unaware that this post-credits sequence even existed, while others knew about it but couldn't find it on their preferred format. Fact 14. The Deputy's impossible bullet math. Deputy Bob Mandel, played by Gary Farmer, creates one of the film's most glaring continuity errors during a crucial action sequence, when his ammunition count defies the basic laws of mathematics in a way that somehow escaped notice from the entire production team. The mistake occurs during one of the movie's most intense moments, when the group of survivors finds themselves huddled together at the top of the boarding house stairs while demons are closing in from all directions, creating a life-or-death situation where every bullet counts. During this tense scene, Breaker asks Deputy Bob to check his ammunition status to determine how much firepower they have left for their final stand against the supernatural attackers. The deputy dutifully opens his revolver cylinder, counts the remaining rounds, and clearly states that he has only 4 shots left in his weapon. This moment is played for dramatic effect to emphasize how dire their situation has become, with the characters facing overwhelming odds and rapidly dwindling resources. However, when the demons finally break through the collector's blood barrier and begin their assault on the survivors, Deputy Bob volunteers to cover the group's retreat into the attic, telling everyone else to climb to safety while he holds off the attacking creatures. During this heroic last stand, viewers who are paying close attention to the action can count exactly 6 distinct gunshots as the deputy fires at the advancing demons, somehow managing to shoot 2 more bullets than his revolver actually contained. This type of ammunition continuity error is particularly noticeable in action films because careful viewers often keep track of how many shots characters fire, especially during climactic scenes where running out of bullets is supposed to create additional tension. The fact that this mistake made it through filming, editing, and final review suggests that everyone involved was so focused on the dramatic intensity of the scene that nobody bothered to verify whether the gunshot count matched the previously established ammunition limit. Fact 15. Ernest Dickerson shot like it was his last chance. Ernest Dickerson approached the directing of Demon Knight with an intensity and visual ambition that reflected his deep uncertainty about whether Hollywood would ever give him another opportunity to helm a major studio horror film. As a black director in an industry that had historically offered very few opportunities for filmmakers of color, especially in the horror genre, Dickerson understood that this project might represent his only chance to showcase his directorial vision on a big-budget production with significant studio backing. Prior to Demon Knight, Dickerson had built his reputation primarily as a cinematographer, working closely with Spike Lee on groundbreaking films like Do the Right Thing, Jungle Fever, and Malcolm X, where he developed a distinctive visual style characterized by bold camera movements, dramatic lighting, and vibrant colors. When he transitioned to directing with his 1992 debut Juice, he demonstrated his ability to tell compelling stories, but Demon Knight represented his first opportunity to work within the horror genre, with the resources and support of a major studio. Knowing that the film industry's track record for giving second chances to directors from underrepresented backgrounds was not encouraging, Dickerson poured everything he had into making Demon Knight as visually striking and technically accomplished as possible. He filled the film with ambitious camera work, including sweeping movements, dramatic Dutch angles, bold color schemes, and dynamic lighting that made every scene feel cinematic and purposeful, treating each shot as if it might be his last opportunity to demonstrate his skills as a visual storyteller. This approach resulted in a horror film that stands out for its technical excellence and visual creativity, with Dickerson using every tool at his disposal to create a movie that looked and felt more expensive and sophisticated than many other horror films of the era. His determination to prove himself through sheer visual craftsmanship helped establish Demon Knight as a cult classic that continues to be appreciated for its distinctive style and technical achievements.